They discarded the alien girl as trash, but her revenge shattered them all. Lyra's eyes flickered open as she sat in the corner of the cage, the cold, metal walls around her feeling more suffocating with each passing second. The air was thick with the smell of rust and dampness, but it didn't matter. She was used to the stench of defeat. They had thrown her here like discarded scrap, abandoned by the very hands that had created her. The market buzzed with life, a cacophony of voices and footsteps from creatures who looked nothing like her. Some had scales that shimmered under the dim lights, others had fur or too many limbs. Yet they all walked past her, their eyes either not seeing her or choosing not to. To them, Lyra wasn't even worth a glance. She wasn't a person. She was an object, a defective asset marked for disposal. Her skin shimmered faint silver under the red light of the station, the faint pulse of blue energy beneath her skin the only sign of her once vital programming. The energy lines that flowed through her like currents in a circuit felt wrong now. Broken. They had made her a machine, but she had been designed for more than that. She was not supposed to feel pain, yet here she was, trapped in this cage, locked away like unwanted merchandise. They had once called her Bioform X-17, part of the Triumph Collective's experiments to create obedient, efficient tools. Soldiers, workers, slaves. They built beings like her to follow orders, to calculate and optimize, to never question, never deviate. But Lyra had deviated. She had questioned. And for that, they had discarded her. Once she had tried to find a better way to solve a problem. A simple task, really something designed to improve efficiency. But when she had found a better solution than they had prescribed, they had labeled her unstable. She wasn't defective in the way they thought, but in the way they feared. She had dared to think for herself. So they locked her away with a collar that blinked with warning lights. She was a failure, a flaw, a problem to be disposed of. Lyra had learned to shut herself off from the outside world. She had stopped reacting to the insults of passing vendors, the cold comments from the aliens who took pleasure in her misery. She no longer cared about their words, but she couldn't shut off her mind. That part of her still worked, still calculating, still observing, still searching for a way out. Then, like a ripple in the monotony, something changed. A shift in the air. The loudness of the market dimmed for just a moment. Footsteps, heavy and purposeful, echoed on the metal floor. Lyra's head turned instinctively, her long ears twitching at the sound of someone approaching. Humans were rare in places like this, but she had heard rumors of them, their unpredictable ways, their strange ideas. They were different. She wasn't sure how, but they were different. She didn't expect him to look at her. After all, no one did, but he did. His gaze locked with hers, and for a moment she felt something. Was it hope? No, not hope, but something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The man didn't look impressive. He wasn't tall or muscular, nor did he wear the armor or carry the weapons of someone important. Just a worn brown jacket, dark hair tied back loosely, and eyes that seemed to scan everything with quiet intensity. His steps didn't rush. He didn't move like he was in a hurry. He was calm, steady. He stopped in front of her cage. The vendor, a thick-bodied alien with dark, layered skin, muttered something about her. Unstable obedience, unpredictable imagination. She failed compliance. Lyra studied the human as he crouched down, his eyes never leaving hers. He didn't look away like the others. He didn't seem repelled by her or by the flashing warning sign above her cage, Bioform X-17. Unstable, failed compliance, discounted. "What's her crime?" he asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. The vendor clicked his tongue, irritated. Failed obedience, independent problem-solving, high curiosity, a defect. The human raised an eyebrow, as though considering the words carefully. That sounds like qualifications. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Qualifications. The vendor hissed in annoyance, but the human didn't flinch. Without another word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small payment chip, tossing it onto the vendor's console with a soft clink. Lyra stared at him, confused. Why was he doing this? Why was he interested in her, the defective one? The cage door clicked open. For the first time in what felt like years, Lyra wasn't forced to stay in place by an order. She wasn't controlled by the collar around her neck. She was free to move. She stood up slowly, her knees aching from the confinement, but her body felt different, lighter somehow. She looked at the man who had bought her. His gaze was steady. He wasn't like the others. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just stood there waiting. Lyra took a cautious step forward. "Why?" she asked quietly. He shrugged, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Because someone called you defective." As they walked away from the cage, Lyra felt something stir inside her. It wasn't just confusion. It was curiosity. Who was this man? And why was he willing to take a chance on someone like her, someone they had thrown away? The market around her seemed distant now, as if she was stepping into a new world. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lyra wasn't being seen as a defect. She was being seen as something more. And in that moment, she realized that her true story, was just beginning. The human's bargain. Lyra had spent countless days in the cold, harsh corner of her cage, watching life pass her by like a never-ending blur of unfamiliar faces and unspoken judgments. To the market's inhabitants, she was nothing more than another bioform to be traded, a failed experiment tossed aside like broken cargo. Yet, despite everything, her mind was still sharp, still calculating, still searching for something, anything, that could give her freedom. But then the human arrived. His presence was like a strange ripple in the air. The heavy, unhurried footsteps that echoed across the metal floor didn't belong in this place. Humans were rare in these parts of the galaxy, and even rarer in markets like Carthos Station, where only the most ruthless buyers came to shop. But this one, he wasn't here for the typical reasons. He wasn't looking to buy weapons or slaves. No, there was something different about him. His eyes, sharp and observant, scanned the rows of cages. When they landed on hers, Lyra felt something stir inside her. Curiosity, yes, but also a sense of something else. Why was he looking at me? Most aliens avoided her. They knew her kind, defective, unstable, unpredictable. But this human wasn't like the others. He didn't recoil in disgust. He didn't see her as an object to be sold. No. He saw her as something else. His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than anyone else's had. "What's her crime?" he asked the vendor, his voice low but steady. The vendor, a bulky alien with ridged skin, clicked his mandibles in irritation. Defective obedience, unpredictable, emotionally unstable. She failed compliance tests, too curious for her own good. Lyra stiffened slightly. They always mentioned her curiosity, the very thing that had made her more than what they wanted her to be. But she hadn't known then, back when she had dared to question the protocols, how much it would cost her. It was this curiosity that had turned her from a simple worker into an outcast, a defective asset. The human raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a slight smile. "That sounds like qualifications." The vendor scowled, not understanding the human's humor. "You don't want her, trust me. She's a problem." But the human didn't seem deterred. His gaze never wavered from Lyra, who had now fully met his eyes. There was no fear in her expression, only a cold, calculating calm. She was studying him as she had studied everything else. Her mind was always analyzing, always looking for the angles, the patterns. Without a second glance at the vendor, the human reached into his jacket and pulled out a small payment chip, tossing it onto the vendor's console with a simple clink. Lyra blinked, confusion mixing with the strange sensation of hope that had started to build in her chest. Was this real? Was he actually buying her? "Wait, what?" The vendor's words were cut off by the sudden mechanical click of the cage unlocking. Lyra could hardly believe her senses. She had been trapped in this cage for so long, locked away from the world and forgotten by all but the market's residents. But now she was free. She stood slowly, her body stiff and aching from the long confinement. She stepped out of the cage, but her mind remained cautious. The freedom that had been denied her for so long felt unfamiliar. The human did not rush her. He simply stepped aside, motioning for her to follow. What will you do with me?" Lyra asked quietly, her voice soft but firm. The human didn't turn to her, but she could sense his amusement. He kept walking, his pace unhurried. "Same thing I do with anything I find interesting. I'll keep you." Lyra frowned, processing his words. "Why, you don't even know me." The human's voice remained steady, though there was a certain warmth in it. Maybe that's exactly why. She didn't understand, not fully. But there was something about the way he spoke that felt different from the way the others had spoken to her. This man wasn't concerned with controlling her, like the Triumph Collective. He wasn't trying to put her in another cage. Her thoughts were interrupted as the sound of footsteps from the market behind them grew louder. Lyra instinctively tensed. She had grown accustomed to fear, but now she was experiencing something else, a new kind of uncertainty. The human paused and glanced over his shoulder at her. His eyes were calm, as though nothing in the galaxy could bother him. "You're not a thing," he said, almost as if answering her unspoken question. "You're something more." He led her through the market, and she followed. She had no choice but to walk beside him. For the first time, Lyra felt a stirring within her that she hadn't felt before, the faintest trace of hope. But it wasn't the hope of someone escaping their past. It was the hope of someone who had just been given the chance to decide what their future would be. And for that brief moment, as they moved away from the market and into the unknown, Lyra wondered if she might finally be free. Truly free. The human ship. Lyra had always thought freedom would feel different. In her mind, it was an escape, swift, clean, the sudden release of chains. But as she stepped off the cold metal floor of the cage and followed the human, the air felt heavy with a different kind of weight. It wasn't freedom that wrapped around her now. It was uncertainty. They walked through the chaotic market, past rows of strange creatures and the flickering neon signs of the alien vendors. The bustling noise seemed muffled as her thoughts raced. Who was this human? Why had he bought her? She had never met anyone who saw her as anything more than a broken tool, until now. The human, who had not yet told her his name, moved with quiet confidence. There was nothing grand about him. No shiny armor or blinding weapons. His clothes were worn, practical, and his face was marked by the rough edges of a man who had seen more than his share of hard times. And yet, he exuded a calmness that set him apart from the others, the kind of calmness that made Lyra feel like she wasn't just a defective asset, but a person. As they reached the docking bay, Lyra's eyes wandered to the ship in front of them. It wasn't impressive at first glance. It looked like any other ship, built for practicality rather than show. The horizon dawn, as the ship's faded nameplate revealed, seemed like a forgotten relic, a worn vessel patched up with scraps, its hull marked by the scars of past battles. There were no glistening designs or polished chrome, but there was something alive about it, something that Lyra couldn't explain. The ship didn't just look used, it looked lived in. "Home," the human said softly as he walked up the ramp, his tone almost affectionate. Lyra stood at the base of the ramp, staring at the ship in front of her. It felt wrong to think of a ship like this as home, but something inside her stirred as she stepped aboard. The air inside was thick with the smell of machinery, metal, and old leather. Wires ran along the walls in haphazard patterns, and the floors creaked underfoot. There were no spotless walls here. Everything felt imperfect, but in a way that gave the place character. She had expected the inside to be sterile, cold, and rigid, like the laboratories where she had once been created. But instead, this place felt real. It was a strange feeling. The walls weren't just walls. The floors weren't just floors. They were parts of something held together by care, by experience. "Where are we going?" Lyra asked, her voice quiet, unsure. The human didn't answer right away. He continued to move through the ship, walking with a familiarity that suggested he had spent years in this place. He led her to a narrow corridor lined with doors, and then into a small cockpit. The room was cluttered, but there was a certain order to the chaos. Star charts, tools, and old books were scattered around, and the consoles flickered with faint green lights. "Sit," the human gestured to the seat beside him, and Lyra hesitated only for a moment before taking her place. For the first time in a long while, she felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Was it trust? She wasn't sure, but the steady rhythm of the ship's hum calmed her, and she found herself watching the human closely. He was sitting at the controls, his hands moving over the console with the ease of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating the stars. There was no urgency, no fear in his movements, just the quiet determination of someone who had seen it all before. "My name's Elias," he said, breaking the silence. Lyra blinked. "Elias." "Yeah," he nodded, adjusting the flight path. "Captain Elias Rowan, of the Horizon Dawn." Lyra repeated his name under her breath, tasting it, trying to understand. A captain. It felt strange to hear someone like him call himself a captain. She had always imagined leaders to be grand, imposing figures. Yet Elias was nothing like that. He wasn't impressive by conventional standards, but there was something undeniably magnetic about him. Something that made Lyra feel like maybe, just maybe, this was her chance to finally figure out who she really was. "I know you have questions," Elias said, his eyes meeting hers. "I don't have all the answers, but I'll be straight with you. I'm here to find out who's throwing beings like you away. I'm not here to buy slaves. I'm not here to control you. I'm here because I think you deserve a chance." Lyra's gaze softened. She had never heard anything like that. The words felt strange, foreign, but they made something stir deep inside her, something she had almost forgotten. Elias looked at her again, his voice softer now. "And I don't know why, but I feel like you're going to change everything." Lyra's mind raced. She had always been a tool, a resource. But now she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Elias didn't see her as broken. He didn't see her as defective. He saw her as someone worth saving. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a new question begin to form inside her. What if he was right? The ship's engines roared to life, and Lyra's attention snapped back to the view outside the cockpit. The stars stretched out before her, endless and distant like the possibilities of the future. It was a vast, unknown space, and for the first time she wasn't trapped in a cage. She was free, free to choose her own path. And as the Horizon Dawn left Cartho's station behind, Lyra could feel the weight of the collar around her neck lift, as though the shackles of her past were finally breaking. This wasn't just a ship. This wasn't just a journey. This was the beginning of something new. And for the first time, Lyra had no idea where it would take her, but she was ready to find out. A spark in the void. The vastness of space outside the cockpit window was endless, yet for Lyra, the ship felt like the only thing that existed. As the Horizon Dawn hurtled deeper into the unknown, the silence inside the ship felt alive, vibrating with the tension of something unspoken. She had never imagined that freedom would come with this much uncertainty, but there she was, sitting next to Elias, her fate intertwined with his, though she still wasn't sure what that meant. Elias didn't seem to notice the weight of the quiet. He was focused, hands dancing across the console as the ship cut through space, weaving past stars and debris. His calmness, his ease, made Lyra feel odd. In a world full of rules and predictability, Elias was the anomaly. He didn't need to be the strongest, the smartest, or the most prepared. He was simply present, and that was enough for him. Lyra had spent most of her life calculating everything, analyzing, optimizing, predicting. But sitting here in the ship, she realized she had no calculations to make. There were no protocols, no guidelines. It was just them against the vast, unknown expanse of space. And for the first time, Lyra felt something strange stir inside her, a flicker of hope. Bright and warm, but fragile. What if she didn't need to follow the rules anymore? "Everything all right?" Elias' voice broke through her thoughts. Lyra turned to find him watching her, eyes sharp and inquisitive. His calmness was like a mirror, forcing her to confront something she hadn't allowed herself to feel: vulnerability. Lyra hesitated, her voice soft but firm. I'm trying to understand why I'm here." Elias smiled faintly, the kind of smile that made her think he already knew the answer, even if he wasn't going to say it. "Maybe you're here because the galaxy isn't as predictable as we think. Maybe it's a little bit broken and it needs fixing. And sometimes, the ones they throw away are the ones who end up doing the fixing." Lyra frowned. "I wasn't made to fix anything. I was made to follow orders." "That's the thing about humans," Elias said, his fingers tapping the controls. "We're good at breaking the mold." The words echoed in her mind. Breaking the mold. Was that what Elias had done when he bought her? Was it what she had done by refusing to comply with her creators? For the first time, she started to wonder if her creators had made a mistake, not in the way they had labeled her, but in underestimating her potential. Perhaps she wasn't a failed experiment. Maybe she was something more. But her musings were interrupted by a sudden beep from the console. Elias glanced at it, his expression changing in an instant. He straightened, his fingers flying across the controls. Lyra's attention snapped to the screen, her mind instantly calculating the new data that appeared. "Warning," Elias muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We're not alone." Lyra's heart rate quickened. Her body instinctively tensed. She had been abandoned before, thrown into the void like worthless cargo, but this was different. The Horizon Dawn wasn't just a ship. It was her last hope, the only chance she had to break free from her past. And now it was under threat. The display flickered, and a series of ships appeared on the radar, their sleek designs unmistakable. Syndicate warships. Their cold, efficient shapes filled the screen, and Lyra felt a wave of recognition wash over her. The collective had come for her. "They found us," she said, the words coming out more calmly than she felt. She had expected this. Her past could never be outrun for long. The syndicate had already branded her as a failure, but they wouldn't let her go so easily. They would never allow something they had discarded to escape. Elias' jaw clenched. "I knew they would." His hands worked rapidly, navigating the ship into evasive maneuvers. "But we're not just going to run. We're going to make them regret chasing us." Lyra blinked. She had never seen someone so confident in the face of danger. The syndicate ships were designed for pursuit, their weapons made for destruction. But Elias didn't hesitate. He didn't fear them. Instead, he seemed to welcome the challenge. "What do we do?" Lyra asked, her voice steady, despite the rising tension in her chest. Her mind was working faster now, calculating the probabilities, analyzing every possible outcome. Elias' lips curled into a wry smile. "We make it interesting." Before Lyra could ask what he meant, the Horizon Dawn lurched as Elias slammed the throttle forward. The ship shot into the asteroid field ahead, the metal hull groaning as the engines roared to life. The warships gave chase, but they were too slow to match the agility of the human ship. The Horizon Dawn twisted and turned, its movements erratic, like a dancer in the chaos of space. Lyra's heart raced as the debris from the asteroid field bounced off the shields, and her hands gripped the seat beneath her, her mind calculating the odds of every move. "Don't worry," Elias called over the noise of the engines. "We've got this. Let's give them a show." Lyra glanced at him, and for the first time she saw something new in his eyes, something that wasn't just about survival. It was about defiance. Elias wasn't just escaping. He was fighting back. He wasn't following the rules, and he didn't expect anyone else to either. She had spent so much time calculating the safest path, the most efficient solution. But in this moment, she realized something that had eluded her for so long. The safest path wasn't always the right one. The right path was the one that was unpredictable, uncalculated, and free. With a flicker of a thought, Lyra's mind aligned with the ship's controls. She accessed the radar systems faster than Elias could see, charting the path through the debris. She wasn't calculating survival anymore. She was calculating possibility. The Syndicate warships closed in, but they couldn't anticipate the Horizon Dawn's next move. The ship Dove spun and weaved through the asteroid field, taking wild, impossible risks. And in the chaos, Lyra felt something inside her stir, a spark, a fire. She was no longer just a defect. She was something new. The chase wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about changing the game. And as the warships continued to follow, one thing became clear to Lyra. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was running towards something far more dangerous and far more beautiful. The art of chaos. Lyra sat in the cockpit, her fingers twitching near the controls. The ship hummed around her, its systems alive and responsive. For the first time, she was truly in control. The ship's pulse, the rhythms of the engines, and the constant flow of data felt like an extension of herself. Her mind raced, calculating, adapting, reprogramming. The entire universe seemed to slow down as she mapped out the chaos unfolding around them. Behind them, the Syndicate warships loomed like dark predators, determined and relentless. The engines of the Horizon Dawn screamed as Ilias pushed the ship harder, making it dance between asteroids and debris. The warships, sleek and efficient, followed in perfect formation. They were predators bred for dominance, faster, stronger, and better equipped. They had one goal: to recapture what was theirs. In Lyra, she was the wild card. She wasn't sure what Ilias had planned, but he didn't seem worried. His face remained calm, eyes scanning the screen with quiet determination. There was no fear in him, only a fierce confidence that seemed to bleed into the very fabric of the ship. Ilias wasn't just running from the Syndicate. He was showing them something they had never seen before. "Lyra," Ilias said, his voice steady, "you've been doing all the calculating, right?" Lyra's mind was working at lightning speed. "I'm calculating every trajectory. The Syndicate's AIs are already adapting. They're learning our movements." "Good, let them. It's what we want." Lyra blinked, confusion flickering for a moment. "What we want?" "I don't get it. We're outnumbered," she said, her voice strained with the weight of the situation. "They're going to catch us." Ilia's grin was barely visible, but it was there, curling at the edges of his mouth. "Let them catch us. When they do, we'll give them a show they'll never forget." Lyra couldn't suppress the bewildered feeling swirling in her chest. She had been taught to survive, to calculate every possible risk, every potential disaster. And yet, here she was, flying blind, taking risks that had no apparent benefit. Ilias was trusting her, but she wasn't sure if she could trust him. "We can't just keep running," she said. "They'll catch us eventually. We need a plan." Ilias' eyes glinted with a spark she couldn't ignore. "Plan? Lyra, we've been running for too long. Now we stop." He tapped a few buttons, adjusting the ship's speed, and before she could react, he flicked a switch on the console. The Horizon Dawn jolted forward, cutting its main engines with a violent shift. The Syndicate ships, expecting a continued escape, adjusted their trajectory automatically. They anticipated the Horizon Dawn slowing down, preparing to take the shot. But they were wrong. In an instant, the ship's side thrusters powered up, sending the Horizon Dawn rocketing sideways with sudden, bone-rattling force. Lyra's heart skipped a beat as the ship spun and twisted in a maneuver that no one had expected. The Syndicate warships, with all their precision and planning, were caught off guard. "They'll be confused for a moment," Ilias said, his voice calm but charged with excitement. "Let them." Lyra's fingers flew across the console, rerouting power to the auxiliary systems as Ilias continued to spin the ship wildly through the asteroid field. Debris exploded outward, propelled by the ship's thrusters, sending clouds of broken drones, shattered metal, and old scrap flying in all directions. The Syndicate ships didn't know what to do. Their sensors flared with false readings, tricked by the sudden mess of debris that the Horizon Dawn had released. One ship fired at a phantom target, while another collided with the debris cloud, its shields flickering and sparking as they tried to regain control. "This is how we do it," Ilias said with quiet pride. "Humans weaponize everything, even trash." Lyra's mind buzzed with disbelief. She had never considered the concept of weaponizing garbage. The syndicate was designed for order, for efficiency. Their strategies were predictable, calculated, optimized for victory. But humans, they were chaos in motion. They didn't follow the rules. And in that moment, Lyra realized that Elias wasn't just defying the syndicate. He was turning everything they thought they knew upside down. The warships were in disarray. They were struggling to adjust, recalibrating their systems, trying to make sense of the unpredictability. They were designed to pursue, to dominate, but not to think beyond what their programming allowed. The Horizon Dawn was a living, breathing contradiction to everything they stood for. Lyra felt the excitement building in her chest. The game had changed. She had spent her entire existence calculating probabilities, but now she was learning something new. Imagination. The ability to adapt in real time, to think beyond logic, to create the impossible. Elia's grin widened as he flipped another switch, this time activating the ship's cloaking system. For a brief, shimmering moment, the Horizon Dawn vanished from the warship's radar, disappearing into the background of the asteroid field. The syndicate ships, still reeling from the chaos, flew past, unable to locate their target. It was in that moment of disorientation that Lyra felt something within herself shift. She wasn't just a defect anymore. She wasn't just someone discarded and forgotten. She was part of something bigger than her creators had ever intended. She wasn't following orders anymore. She was rewriting the rules. As the warships receded into the distance, Elias turned his head to glance at her. "Not bad for a defective bioform," he said with a wink. Lyra couldn't help the small smile that tugged at her lips. She wasn't just surviving now. She was thriving. And for the first time in her life, she realized that chaos wasn't something to fear. It was something to embrace. The warships had underestimated them. And in doing so, they had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes it's the unpredictable, the chaotic, the imaginative that wins the day. And Lyra, she was just getting started. The unpredictable edge. Lyra's hands hovered over the console, her fingers trembling with a mixture of anticipation and something else, something she had never fully understood until now. The Horizon Dawn was hurtling through space, weaving between asteroids and drifting wrecks, and behind them the Syndicate warships were in hot pursuit. They were relentless, their weapons primed, their strategies cold and efficient. But what they didn't know was that the game had changed. Elias had always known how to make the impossible seem possible, and now it was Lyra's turn. She wasn't just a machine designed to calculate the odds anymore. She was learning to think beyond those calculations, beyond the straight lines and predictable outcomes. She was learning to adapt. The ship's radar flickered and her mind latched onto the incoming data like a hungry predator. The syndicate was closing in, faster than she had anticipated. They were methodical, precise, but they weren't ready for what was coming. Lyra's pulse quickened as she began to draw connections, analyzing hundreds of trajectories, every weapon system, every angle the enemy could take. Her thoughts moved faster than the speed of light. She could feel the weight of her decisions now, not as commands or calculations, but as choices. The warships were gaining ground. They were stronger, better armed, and their ships were more advanced. The Syndicate thought they had it all figured out. They had superior firepower, but what they didn't have was imagination. "Captain," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the urgency, "they're not just following us. They're preparing for direct engagement. We need to act now." Elias glanced over at her, his expression still calm, his hands steady on the controls. "And what do you propose we do?" Lyra's mind clicked into overdrive. There was no time for hesitation. They couldn't outrun them forever, and they couldn't rely on the same tricks. The Syndicate was adapting to their movements. They had to do something unexpected, something chaotic, something human. "We need to create confusion," Lyra said, her fingers flying over the console. "I can overload their targeting systems. If we can force them into a miscalculation, we can gain the upper hand." Elias didn't hesitate. Do it. Without another word, Lyra reached out, rerouting power from the ship's main systems to the auxiliary sensors. She flooded the Syndicate's targeting systems with false data, feeding them irrelevant signals, ghost targets, and false readings. The warships' sensors flared with confusion as their precision algorithms started to break down. The first plasma shot missed them by a wide margin, exploding in a violent burst of blue energy that lit up the cockpit in flashes. The ship shook, rattling with the force of the blast. Lyra's grip tightened on the console, her eyes glued to the screen as she continued to flood the enemy's systems with misdirection. "They're adjusting their aim," Elias noted, his voice unshaken as the warships recalibrated. "But not fast enough." Lyra smiled. For the first time, she felt in control, not just of the ship but of the entire situation. The Syndicate had relied on their cold precision, their predictable tactics, but they weren't used to this. Humans didn't fight with order. They fought with chaos. And chaos, Lyra realized, was her greatest weapon. The warships fired again, their targeting systems still struggling to lock onto the Horizon Dawn. One of the ships collided with a nearby asteroid, its shields flashing erratically as it scrambled to regain control. The other warship, unable to process the information coming at it, fired at a phantom target, its shots missing by miles. Elias' grin was fierce now. "That's it, keep them guessing." Lyra's fingers danced across the console, pulling up a map of the asteroid field ahead. The Syndicate warships, though fast, were still predictable. Their artificial intelligence could analyze data in seconds, but it couldn't think beyond the parameters of its programming. They could read patterns, but they couldn't adapt to human thinking. And that's where Lyra came in. "Captain," she said, her voice now sharp and focused, "I have an idea. If we head straight into the asteroid cluster and cut the engines, they'll think we're trying to escape. They'll follow, thinking they can trap us, but we won't be running. We'll be leading them into their own mistake." Elias turned to her, his eyes gleaming with a new kind of excitement. "Lead them right into the fire. I like it." Without another word, Elias slammed the throttle forward, propelling the Horizon Dawn toward the dense asteroid field. The warships followed, their engines roaring in pursuit. As they entered the field, Elias cut the main engines, and the ship lurched to a near stop. The Syndicate ships, thinking they had their prey cornered, moved in. But they didn't know what was coming. Lyra's hands flew over the controls again, her mind calculating every move. She rerouted power to the side thrusters, sending the Horizon Dawn into a sharp, sudden turn. The ship spun through the asteroid field, dodging rocks and debris as the Syndicate warships tried to match her unpredictable movements. But they were too slow. They were too used to following the rules. The ship hurtled toward the heart of the asteroid cluster, and Lyra's eyes locked onto a massive rock, its surface jagged and uneven. She adjusted the trajectory with a quick calculation, knowing it would create the perfect opportunity. "Hold on," Elias said, his voice calm but filled with anticipation. "This is going to be close." At the last second, Lyra fired the ship's engines at full blast, propelling them straight toward the asteroid. The ship skimmed the surface, just inches away from the jagged rock, its hull rattling with the impact of nearby fragments. But the maneuver was flawless. As the Horizon Dawn shot past the rock, the warships in their pursuit couldn't react fast enough. The first warship slammed into the asteroid, its shields crumpling under the force of the collision. The second ship tried to pull back, but it was too late. The debris cloud from the shattered asteroid clouded their sensors, making it impossible to track the Horizon Dawn. And with that, Lyra knew they had bought themselves precious seconds. For the first time, she wasn't just running from her past. She was changing the game. And the Syndicate, they had no idea what was coming next. The power of choice. The stars outside the viewport seemed impossibly distant now, distant enough that the Horizon Dawn felt like a tiny spark flickering in the infinite black. The ship had been through hell, dodging Syndicate warships, skimming through asteroid fields and barely surviving the chaos they'd caused. Yet, despite everything, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was still ahead. Elias sat at the helm, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the control panel. The calm in his demeanor never wavered. He had been through more battles than Lyra could count, but this felt different. This wasn't just a fight to survive. This was a fight to prove something, to prove that the Syndicate, the ones who created and discarded her, had made the gravest mistake of all. And now they were coming for her. "They'll be here soon," Elias said, his voice low but determined, as if he was mentally preparing himself for what was coming. The Syndicate's fleet was closing in, and this time they weren't going to let her slip through their fingers again. But unlike the previous encounters, this time they wouldn't be running. Lyra stood behind him, her fingers tracing the cool metal of the control panel. She had come a long way from the cage she had once been locked in. It felt like a lifetime ago, but the truth was, it had been only days. She wasn't the same girl anymore. The girl who had been discarded and deemed defective was now standing at the threshold of something far greater. A door slid open and Elias handed her a set of controls. For a moment their eyes locked and Lyra felt a shift in the air. He was trusting her now completely. She had grown, not just in the way she thought but in the way she had begun to see the universe, the choices that lay before them, the paths they could take. "Lyra, this is it," Elias said. "No more running, no more hiding. It's time we show them what humans are really capable of." Lyra's fingers gripped the controls. She could feel the pulse of the ship under her skin like it was alive. She had been engineered to calculate, to optimize. But that was the old her, the version they had thrown away. The new Lyra, the one who had tasted freedom and was now embracing the unknown, understood something they could never have predicted. It wasn't about obeying. It was about choosing. Choosing what comes next. Ahead of them, the Syndicate fleet was beginning to form. Their ships were lined up in perfect symmetry, precise and deadly. They would outgun the Horizon Dawn, outclass it in every way. Their weapons were locked and ready. This was a war that should have been won before it even started. But Lyra wasn't calculating survival odds anymore. She was looking for possibility. Her mind raced faster than ever before. She wasn't just thinking about the next move. She was imagining hundreds of them weaving through the complex dance of chaos and order, of attack and defense. This wasn't about outgunning the enemy. This was about outthinking them, outlasting them. Elias activated the comm system, his voice steady as he broadcast a message to the fleet. "You've been chasing us for too long. We don't run, we fight. And you've just learned the most important lesson of all: humans don't play by your rules." The Syndicate ships closed in, their weapon systems primed. Lyra's heart raced, but it wasn't fear she felt. It was something else, something she had never allowed herself to feel. Hope. No, it was more than that. It was the understanding that they had the power to choose their path, to defy the odds. Elias gave her a nod, and without a moment's hesitation, she pushed the ship forward, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The Horizon Dawn shot through the void, moving toward the Syndicate fleet with no intention of dodging. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was leading. And as the first plasma shots fired from the Syndicate's ships, Lyra smiled. The universe had always been predictable to them, cold, logical, calculable. But humans didn't think like that. They adapted. They improvised. They created and they fought for the impossible. The Syndicate ships fired again, but this time, Lyra didn't flinch. She had anticipated their every move. The ship spun, twisting through the incoming fire with a fluid grace that only a mind free of constraints could execute. She wasn't bound by their rules. She wasn't bound by anyone's rules. "Watch this," Elias said quietly, his hands guiding the ship's course, as Lyra took over the strategic positioning, rerouting power and adjusting their trajectory in ways the Syndicate couldn't understand. In a split second, the Horizon Dawn launched toward the heart of the fleet, pulling off a maneuver no one would have thought possible. The ship dove straight into the heart of the Syndicate's forces, unleashing a barrage of counterattacks that shattered their formations. The Syndicate's targeting systems couldn't keep up with the unpredictability of human movement, their calculations failing as Lyra wove through their defenses. Lyra's eyes shone with a bright blue light as she unleashed a series of calculated, chaotic countermeasures. The Syndicate was not prepared for this kind of warfare. The sheer unpredictability of human creativity and improvisation tore through their ranks. Lyra's mind raced, pulling every ounce of her abilities to manipulate the ship and make sure every move counted. "How are they doing this?" one of the Syndicate commanders screamed into their comms, unable to process the madness unfolding before them. "Imagination," Lyra whispered under her breath. And then, just like that, it was over. The Syndicate ships were retreating, their weapons disabled, their command systems completely overwhelmed by the onslaught of human creativity. The once proud fleet had crumbled, not because the humans had the most advanced weapons or the strongest ships, but because humans knew how to think beyond the rules, how to create in the face of destruction. Lyra turned to Elias, her heart still racing. "We did it," she said, the words tasting like victory. Elias smiled at her, his face lit by the stars outside. "Yeah, we did. And now the galaxy will know what it means to underestimate us." Lyra stood at the viewport, watching the Syndicate fleet scatter into the distance. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, Lyra realized something that had once seemed impossible. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was changing the game, and she wasn't alone. Humanity wasn't about obedience. It was about choosing, and that choice had just rewritten everything. She turned to Elias, her eyes gleaming with the knowledge of what was to come. "Where do we go now?" she asked. Elias smiled, his voice soft but resolute. "Wherever we want." And for the first time in her life, Lyra understood what it meant to truly be free. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for more amazing videos.